Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Got a story about teachers, and it sounds a lot like that hospital story we did not so long ago. And I told you about that, where a bunch of people wanted to leave a hospital. And the hospital ran to court and got an injunction keeping workers from quitting their jobs in an at-will state. So it's an interesting question about how often this happens in other fields. And John sent me notes. Steve, check out the story from Illinois. WGLT.org runs the story about teachers who want to quit and they're not allowed to. And here we go. Rejecting teacher resignations. Unit 5 tests how Illinois might respond to staffing shortage. Michelle Steinbacher wrote the article. McLean County's largest district denied 4 resignations submitted by special ed teachers weeks before the first day of school. 2 of the teachers agreed to stay when they were told they couldn't leave, but the other ones, we'll see. So before school started, some special ed teachers turned in their resignations, and the school said, I don't think so. Can't do that. So the 2 others who ignored the warning left to teach elsewhere. And their teaching licenses are now in jeopardy. So it turns out that they can go teach someplace else, sort of, because their teaching license might be yanked in response to the fact that they quit, but were told they couldn't. Any teacher can leave an Illinois school district, of course. In general, they got to give 30 days notice, whether in the summer or during the school year. But what's at issue here is Illinois law that applies to any teacher who's got tenure during the school term. A district has the right to reject the resignation of a tenured teacher if it means the teacher would leave during the school term to take a teaching job at a different school district. So if you're quitting to go work someplace else, they can go, you can't do that if you're a tenured teacher. Now, with school board support, Unit 5 has referred the 2 cases to the Illinois State Board of Education. A license suspension of up to 1 year is possible. So it's kind of like in the old days when athletes wanted to change schools. You could transfer to a different school, but sometimes you had to sit some time out. And they're basically saying, yeah, you can do that, but we might suspend your license for a year. Multiple calls to the Board of Education offices in Springfield and Chicago were not returned. Now, the statute has not been used before because there's been no need, said Unit 5 Human Resources Director Roger Baldwin, noting that the nation is facing a huge teachers shortage. You don't really have to go much further than just to watch the morning news to hear that 300 to 400,000 teachers are leaving every year. He said many Unit 5 teaching positions used to draw 50 to 75 applicants, but now only a handful of people apply. So in the old days, if you quit and went someplace else, they didn't care. They could replace you instantly. He's saying they can't do that anymore. Special ed roles are even harder to fill. Now, I've mentioned before that in my family, the most common profession of my ancestors, relatives, was teacher. Teacher. My grandfather was a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher. My father was a teacher. My mother was a teacher. And I myself taught for 10 years. And in that group of people, my father, for instance, was a school administrator also and dealt with special education. My grandfather was the dean of a college as well as a professor. So we have all these different people in our family. So I've been raised in an environment where we're constantly talking about school, education, and all of that. So this is surprising to me. I've never seen a law quite like this. And as noted, the law's been on the books before, but nobody cared. So now, of course, they have an issue because these teachers want to leave and they might not be able to replace them. A University of Illinois professor, Paul Bruno, who specializes in education, recently told National Public Radio, the teacher shortage is not across the board. It affects some geographic regions more than others, and it's acutely felt in certain disciplines. Science, language, and special education, finding teachers there is often quite difficult. And I know that my father talked about that, trying to find people to work in special education settings was often very, very difficult. So the critical need for special ed services was key in Unit 5's decision. The district already had 4 vacancies, The newly submitted resignations of 4 more would have doubled the shortage. Hang on, let me see that math checks out. They had 4 vacancies. They got 4 resignations. Going from 4 to 4 is 8. 8 is double 4. Yeah, that checks out. That checks out. When we're 7 days out, 10 days out from the start of the school year, and we've been trying to find applicants all summer long for these particular positions, we already have 4 or 5 that we're trying to fill all summer. We know we're not going to come up with a number and we fill 7 or 8, said Baldwin. The fact that Unit 5 would have doubled its vacancies in special ed this fall meant the district was in a difficult position, says the school board president, Barry Hitchens. The board is charged with ensuring teaching resources are available to district students, so the situation needed attention. He said, adding the rejections really come down to the district simply requiring teachers to honor their contracts. And that's the other thing I've got to tell you. And when I talked before about the hospitals, we're talking about the hospital saying, this is an at-will employee, but we want to force them to stay here. People said, how do you do that? I mean, what possible right do you have to do that? Well, this is different. In this situation, there is a law on the books that specifically addresses teachers who've acquired tenure. And so presumably people in Illinois who are in this position, i.e. tenured teachers who want to quit, should know that this is a possibility. This could happen. And I know people are going to say, Steve, it's still unfair. And if the law is unfair, it's like any other law. You got to live by it or agitate to change it. You can try to do that too. The times themselves are changing. The point is that 20 years ago, it probably didn't matter. So you've got these laws on the books that don't get invoked, and a lot of people forget about them or are not aware of them, or if they are aware of them, they think, well, it's never been used before. What are the odds? What are the odds? So the resignations were submitted less than a month before the start date for the 2 teachers' 2022 to 2023 contract, said the leaders of Unit 5. According to the Illinois School Code, an expectation of continued employment for the school term already would have kicked in. That's the legal standard that Illinois has in place to allow districts to limit tenured teachers from going from one school district to another during a school year. At its August meeting, the school board voted 5-1 to send the 2 teachers' resignation cases to the ISBE, where they're hoping to get these teachers' certifications yanked. If we hadn't gone down this route, we might have had additional teachers go as well. It's trying to reduce the impacts to our students at that point, said Hitchens. Unit 5 school board member Jeremy DeHaye was the only member voting against the referral. He voted no primarily because of concern of how it would be perceived by future teachers. And the man has a point. Think about this. So you're a teacher, you're thinking about going to work in this district, and you hear that, oh, by the way, if you become tenured in this district and you decide to leave, they might go after your professional license if you try to do that. And that might deter people in the future from going there. And remember, they're already having trouble getting people to come. So there you go. DeHaye said he understands why procedures are in place to require teachers not leave for other school districts once the school term is underway. But he asks, what happens if Unit 5 is even with another district competing for a job candidate? The policy of sending names to the state board could be a deal breaker for some applicants. And I would look at that and go, oh, I don't like that. Don't like that possibility at all. He said that in such a competitive job market, maybe it's better for the district to avoid a reputation as being an employer who won't let teachers move on. Anything we can do to try to paint Unit 5 in the best light for potential new hires would be best for us, he said. One school board member abstained from voting, telling WGLT she hadn't been on the board long enough to make an informed vote on the resignation issue. Both teachers whose resignations were rejected declined to be interviewed. And I chuckled slightly there, and I'm not laughing at the woman for saying she wouldn't vote. I'm actually thinking it was a smart choice to make. She says, I just got on the school board, and they're holding a vote that appears to be quite important, and I'm not necessarily up to speed on everything that's going on here, so I will simply not vote. It turns out her vote wouldn't have been that important, but it's an interesting way of approaching it, and I agree with it. So it's a weird situation, and again, we're back to the workplace. And so in some states where you are an at-will employee, it goes both ways. They can fire you anytime they want. You can quit anytime you want. Okay? But here we're talking about teachers who have contracts, but also the law specifically addresses this. It's simply a law that had never been widely used, if used at all. I'm not sure if it's been used before, but it sounds from the article that it's not something that was that commonly used. And I suspect that when the teachers turned in their resignations, they were thinking business as usual. People do this all the time. And now they found out that, oh, no, that's not what's happening. So I'll give them credit, the school board that is, because they did notify the teachers and said, just to let you know, we're going to come after you because the law says we can. And so two of those teachers then changed their minds and came back, but the other two appear to be pressing it to see what's going to happen. And it's a weird situation because think about that. If those people stick their guns, the two teachers who left and have been threatened with their professional licenses, if their licenses get revoked or suspended or whatever it might be, they can't teach for a year. So do they sit the year out in principle, or do they stay with the district that they wanted to leave? And of course, if you are in that situation, it might be a matter of what you can afford to survive. So it's a crazy story. This time it's teachers, not hospital workers. But and like I said, I know all about teaching, and I've taught myself. So the idea that there's a teacher shortage right now, people know this. The question is this how you stem the tide? So rejecting teacher resignations, Unit 5 tests how Illinois might respond to staffing shortage. WGLT published it. Michelle Steinbacher wrote it for WGLT.org. John sent it to me. Thanks a lot. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. It always seems impossible until it's done.